And we're back. Thank you very much for staying with us because we have the Congresswoman for the 17th Congressional District, Congresswoman Cheri Bustos. Thank you for joining us on At Issue.
Thanks for having me.
And just a reminder again that the 17th District includes a southern portion of Peoria, Pekin, over to the Quad Cities, which you call home.
Correct.
And then up to a portion of Rockford.
Correct.
So you have a wide swath there to cover.
7,000 square miles.
And how many of those have you visited?
I have visited virtually every single one of them, and it's made up of 14 counties, and we've got some of more of the urban areas in Peoria, the Quad Cities, and Rockford, and in between there, it's very rural. So it's a very diverse district that I represent.
Before we get into the topics, I just have a general question for you. How would you rate the campaign between you and Mr. Schilling? How's it going? Would you characterize it as a little rougher than you had hoped, or what's your take?
Well, I would have hoped that we could have focused more on just the issues. I prefer to talk about what I've accomplished, what I hope to accomplish should I be fortunate enough to be reelected. I think what I hear from voters in all those areas I just talked about is they want to make sure that there's somebody in this office who understands the importance of working together and who's going to focus on moving the country forward. I've worked very hard to do that in the last 1 year and 10 months, and I think that's what people care about. Believe me, I understand very, very well why people are tired of not just this campaign, but all of the campaigns going on throughout Illinois, throughout this congressional district. The advertising can get overwhelming. The attacks are just they're just very unnecessary. People want to hear about the issues, and I wish we could focus on that.
Let's talk about the issues.
Good, thank you. And thanks for having a program that wants to talk about the issues.
Well, but let's start with health care. Healthcare, during the last couple of years, we've seen what most people call Obamacare passed. Would you, as a Congresswoman, suggest any changes to Obamacare, especially in light of the fact that the goal here is to reduce the cost of medicine without reducing the quality of medicine? What changes might you suggest?
Sure. I think we need to look at this as something that is a start to reforming the way healthcare is delivered, but certainly we have a lot of work to do. I'd like to talk about this, though, in a broader perspective. First of all, I've spent the previous 10 years of my career working in healthcare. So I am one of the very few members of Congress who actually worked in healthcare and saw what happened before the Affordable Care Act, directly after the Affordable Care Act was passed, and now as a member of Congress, kind of how the rollout went and what we need to do going forward. But on a very personal level, one of the main reasons I ran for Congress was my brother literally was on his deathbed when my opponent was first elected. He had a rare form of cancer, had a good job, what we thought was good insurance, but this insurance company would not pay for the care that his doctor said he needed. Now, I come from a family where we were fortunate enough where we could all pitch in and pay for his care, but most families I meet are not in a position to do that. And so what's important to note right now, and this is, I'm talking very specifically about the 17th Congressional District, the one I serve, where we're sitting right now, we now have 40,000 children who have pre-existing conditions in this congressional district who now will no longer have to face, their families will no longer have to face a big insurance company that will say, we don't have to cover you because you have a pre-existing condition. 40,000 children. We have 17,000 families now who have insurance in our congressional district who previously didn't. And then nationwide, 10 million families now have health insurance who didn't previously. That said, we also have a rollout of the Affordable Care Act that was very flawed. So what I have supported in my time in Congress were measures such as giving businesses an additional year to get this all figured out. What was called the individual mandate, giving individuals an extra year to get this figured out. If people went online to sign up for health insurance and weren't successful in that timeline, if you remember, it was very flawed and people were having a hard time with this. We passed something that said if you tried to sign up and weren't successful, we'll give you that extra time. So my votes have reflected that it was a flawed rollout. There have been problems with it. and worked on fixing those as we went along. And as we move forward and as we see further flaws in the system, if those emerge, then I think we can address those as they come up.
Let's turn to jobs, something you've talked a lot about. Specifically, what would you like to see Congress do? What will you be promoting to help create jobs, not just in the nation, but here in the 17th Congressional District?
Well, one area that I'm very proud of, because we focused on it really from day one of my campaign the last time, is manufacturing. And the reason manufacturing is so important is, first of all, they are jobs where people can support their families. These are not minimum wage jobs, they're good jobs. And because of the foundation that we already have built in this congressional district, and we've got the world headquarters for Caterpillar right here. We have the world headquarters for John Deere out of the Quad Cities, and we have major aerospace manufacturing out of the Rockford area. So we've already got this tremendous foundation where we have this unparalleled work ethic. We know manufacturing, we understand it. But we need to take this to the next level. So I was very proud to play a role in landing what's called the Digital Manufacturing Lab in the state of Illinois. And this will literally lead to the next industrial revolution. And we are ground zero for it right here. So what will happen out of this manufacturing lab is we will be able to identify literally from the entire process, from let's say concept development to product getting out the door, and then end of life use of this product. We'll be able to examine all the way along the line, the manufacturing line, where are there flaws in this, where are there wasteful steps in this, and then what will we need to do to train that next generation of worker. So it's workforce development, it's getting waste out of the system, and it is getting a product out the door in a faster way. This will make us globally more competitive. And we have an opportunity throughout our congressional district to form manufacturing hubs that feed into this manufacturing lab, which is physically located in Goose Island, Illinois, just north of Chicago. We think, for instance, right here in Peoria, I just visited OSF, their training facility, their JUMP training facility. They are already beginning to integrate engineering with medicine. So we can, and this is a concept at this point, but we could literally make a medical manufacturing hub right here in Peoria that will feed into this manufacturing lab and be able to take innovative ideas and turn those into marketable products.
You mentioned the minimum wage. The jobs you're talking about are not minimum wage, but for people who have minimum wage jobs, what's your stance on that?
Well, I wholeheartedly support raising the minimum wage for a number of reasons. You know, we're not in a bi-state community right here where we're sitting, but our congressional district is actually in a tri-state area where the minimum wage is lower in Iowa, where the minimum wage is lower in Wisconsin. And so this would actually, a federal minimum wage would help level that playing field. That's just one point. But from a humanitarian perspective, we have people working full-time, making minimum wage, who live below the poverty line. And to some people's surprise, most minimum wage workers, they're not like the 16-year-old high school kid. It's mostly women, and these are people who are trying to support their families. This would lift these families, these people out of poverty by raising that minimum wage. And I think the other concept that is maybe not understood fully, as that lifts people out of poverty, families out of poverty, it also gives them more spending power. So it's actually an economic boon to raise the minimum wage. So people will spend that money that they make because they won't be in a position to set that aside. It's just not enough money to set aside, but they'll use that, and it actually helps boost the economy. So for all of those reasons, I support this. It would raise the minimum wage to $10.10 an hour, and that would happen over the course of 3 years.
You also mentioned the large corporations, Caterpillar, John Deere, the aerospace industry up in Rockford. There has been a lot of discussion about whether or not the corporate tax rate is competitive, the U.S. corporate tax rate is competitive. Do you take a position on that?
Well, I think our tax code needs revamping for a lot of reasons. I'm in favor of simplifying it. You know, there's a proposal out there, actually in Congress, didn't make much progress, that would turn I believe we have 7 tax brackets into narrowing that down to 3. It would lower the upper end of that, but it would also remove a lot of the tax breaks that are in there, the tax loopholes that are already in there, some of which we need to address. I don't happen to favor removing the charitable tax giving. And I would think, being a public television station, that might be something that you might want to take a stance on as well. But
I'm going to remain neutral.
Okay, fair enough, fair enough. But people want to make charitable contributions, and I think that they should get a tax deduction for that. As far as the mortgage tax deduction, that's also very important for home ownership. But under some proposals, those would be removed. Now, let's take a look at some of the other tax loopholes, the tax deductions. We're still giving tremendous tax breaks to big oil companies when they're still making record profits, billions of dollars per quarter. I support removing that. I also want to make sure that it's fair, and as we look at this, more than anything, you got to make sure that middle-class families, they have a chance to, more than anything, that they have a chance to succeed, and that's all part of that tax code as well.
Let's go outside the borders for a moment. Right now, we're having an issue. The world is having an issue with the Islamic State terrorist group. What role do you think the United States should play in regard to combating IS?
Well, we have to take a role in it when we look at what we're facing here. We've got a group that hates Americans, hates America, hates what we stand for, the fact that we find freedom something that is sacred. We love democracy. All of that we love, they hate, and they hate us for that. So there's a national security interest at stake. One of the last votes that I cast before coming back to Illinois from this last session was making sure that we have resources to arm the rebels that are fighting this group, the rebels who live in that area. So I supported arming them and training them. I think we have seen some level of success. We've had the airstrikes, and then those have been, at this point, the boots on the ground to help fight this going forward. But as we look at what's going on in the Middle East and just security overall, I will always support first trying to work through diplomacy, but it doesn't always work. So then that means we sometimes have to go to the next level, which is typically economic sanctions. That doesn't always work, and then we're faced with what we have right now with this ISIS threat, where we're doing the airstrikes, and I hope that we have success through arming these rebels and training them. I hope that we can have total success through that. I don't know if we can, but before I would make any decision going forward, I've already been briefed by the Secretary of the Army on this. I have been briefed by generals who have been on the ground in the Middle East. But my hope is that we'll have success with this, but this is an evolving crisis that we have to judge as we move forward.
So you don't take a position on boots on the ground for American troops yet?
My hope is that we will not have to have boots on the ground. But I also am not one of those persons who will be the line in the sand type of statement, because we have to be ready to make sure that we're protecting our people and our interests first. I hope that we don't have to go in that direction, though. You
mentioned diplomacy. Is there a diplomatic solution to the Israeli and Palestinian situation?
I went to Israel a little more than a year ago. It was I only took 2 trips overseas during this term in Congress. And the first one was to Israel, the other one was to Afghanistan as we were drawing our troops out. I knew that we would have votes on both of those issues and wanted to have a deeper understanding on that. What we've done to help Israel by investing in the Iron Dome has given them great peace of mind. It is just a tough situation over there that I hope and pray that diplomacy will save the day. But we've had there have been conflicts over there for many years, and we've been involved in that. I think Secretary of State Kerry has done a very good job of trying to broker conversation over there. And right now we're at a good point. I mean, we're not firing back and forth at this point. But again, that's something that's evolving, and I hope that diplomacy can save the day.
And for the viewers, clarification, Iron Dome is an anti-missile system where they can shoot missiles out of the sky that are incoming. Let's also stay outside the border, but just outside the border, the immigration issue. We have a lot of illegal immigrants in the country, some of which choose to become residents, some can't, some won't, and we've got more that want to cross the border. Do you have a preferred solution?
I do. I actually am a co-sponsor of a legislation that calls for comprehensive immigration reform, and this is a complex problem, a complex issue that requires complex answers. And what I support is multifold. It looks at border security. It looks at cracking down on unscrupulous businesses who knowingly hire people who are here in our country illegally to take advantage of the fact that we don't have immigration reform. And it also addresses a path to legal residency. And I think it's very important to note, though, that this is not a simple path, but it's one that, in my opinion, makes sense when you have 11 million people in our country, that we need to try to come up with an answer so they can become tax-paying citizens and members of our society. But it would require paying a fine. It would require going to the back of the line, learning English, making sure that you don't commit a crime. And if you look at this whole process, that takes about 13 years. So it's not an easy process, but I think it's fair and it's tough, and I think it's realistic. So I support this in comprehensive fashion because it is we need to address all of what I just laid out. And just on a personal note and a humanitarian note, our country is strong because of its diversity. And we all have come, most of us have come from other places, and it's in my opinion what makes our country the envy of the world. We're diverse and we bring people together, and I hope over time that we can that all of us can see that that's a strength.
Let's talk about the soldiers you referred to in Afghanistan that you visited. They come home, and some of them have some issues brought on by their service in the military. There has been criticism of the VA. There has been some criticism of just how we've treated some of the injured ones. Do you see any improvement in the way the VA hospitals handle these troops? Do you see any improvement in how we can offer the appropriate benefits to these veterans who have served so bravely?
I hope going forward that before we enter any kind of conflict that we look at the true cost of war. And what you're just laying out right now is part of the true cost of war, that we have men and women who come home and they are scarred by what they have seen and what they have had to do to fight for our freedom. There's never been a time in my life where I've had a greater appreciation for the people who do that. Again, my trip to Afghanistan to see people on the ground and what they've had to go through. On our own staff, our chief of staff is a boots-on-the-ground combat veteran. She served 2 tours in Iraq. We have a wounded warrior who was in a helicopter mishap, who heads all of our legislative issues on veterans and defense. And so I'm very proud to have that on our staff. So it's very personal when we talk about this. The VA crisis is brought to light some issues within the system. I'm proud to say that of the community-based outpatient clinics, the outreach clinics that we have throughout our congressional district.
One in Peoria.
One in Peoria. We've got one down the road in Galesburg. We have 6 altogether that serve our congressional district, and then we have 3 hospitals that physically are located outside of our congressional district but serve our veterans. And without exception, I visited every single one of them, and in some cases just did stop by so they didn't know I was going to be there. I talked with the veterans who are waiting to be served, veterans who were just being served. I talked with the clinical staff, the schedulers, the administrators. And the overall rating of these centers in our region is they're good. They provide good care. There's room for improvement. We need that scheduling software that was such a problem that was brought to light, that there were cheaters within the system that basically left veterans out to wait way too long. the software is old. It was first put in the 80s, and if you think about that, you know, I think about old software that I used going back to the 80s. Well, you know, you can't just patch that and have a good system. You need to, over time, replace that, and they've just been patching that. So that needs to be addressed.
Is there enough staff?
Not in all cases. There are some specialty areas that we need more of. We need kind of an overall review of the areas where we need more people, and maybe we can, you know, realign resources. I don't think it's always an issue of we need more money, we need more staff. We need to do it right, and we've identified some areas that need improving. We have passed that on to the leadership within the VA, and some of these are being worked on. But I can't, as I sit here, I can't say that that's necessarily the answer. I think part of the answer is the fact that, and we passed this, this session of Congress passed this, where people, if they can't get the services they need within the VA, they can go outside the VA, and I think that was a step in the right direction. But you know, we've got to make sure, though, that we understand the cost of war, on, you know, the human cost of war, and that we treat these veterans with the utmost respect and make sure that they get the care that they need.
Turning to education, how much of a role should the federal government play? And let's address Common Core in the answer.
Well, I think the best decisions made are those that are made closest to the student. I believe that curriculum can be formulated by community, keeping in mind what the workforce needs are going to be, and making sure that when kids leave the K through 12 system, that they are well prepared to go into the work world, or well prepared to go on to community college or to a four-year college. I don't know that we're always doing that. You know, the Common Core, I think there's so many misperceptions and misconceptions about that, but that came out of the governors, the national governors movement, and there are 45 governors that signed off on this. So this was not a mandate from the federal government. And I think you know, people who have stirred this up, they're using, it's not based in fact always, but my philosophy, I guess the long and short of it is, these curriculum decisions can be made close to home. I think that teachers need to play a role, parents need to play a role, the school boards need to make sure that they're tapping into what parents feel they want to share. And school administrators at the local level need to, in the end, be responsible for that.
The news has been dominated by Ebola recently. How would you judge the response of the United States to the Ebola crisis, not only in how we've helped the 3 nations that are heavily impacted by it, but how we've done in trying to limit the exposure to Americans on our soil?
Well, I think that the response has not been exactly how it should have happened. In a healthcare crisis, and again, I told you earlier I worked in healthcare, and I worked in healthcare at a time, it was right post 9/11 when I started there. And I saw how, if you remember the anthrax scare, and literally I was working in a hospital where somebody spilled some Cremora, and all of a sudden the hazmat team comes out, and it just reminds me how important communication is at all levels when you're talking about a biohazard. And you know, so the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the World Health Organization, for that matter, now we've even got Department of Defense and the Homeland Security. We've got a lot of divisions that have touched this Ebola crisis. I think it's a positive move that we have a point person now who can oversee these, you know, these diverse agencies. But communication is critical, and that has to go all the way down to every level of healthcare. What's going on in Peoria right now, I just visited OSF and how they're training hands-on folks who are delivering care on a daily basis, how they're training them on how to put on the garb, how to take off the garb, how they're interacting with anybody who enters into their hospital now, and the questions that are being asked. And so right here in Peoria, this training is happening, and it's for the hands-on healthcare providers all over this region. But you know, that's got to start, really, if you think about it, immediately if there's a healthcare crisis like this, and there's a scare like there is. As far as the isolation, the science would say that we've got to be very, very careful about this so we can make sure that there's healthcare providers who will go over to West Africa and help fight this so this doesn't spread into something even bigger than it is. But at the same time, we need to make sure, very sure, that we don't have any more cases in the United States. And so far, the fact that we've had, I believe there's been 3 now, it's frightening to people. And so being overly cautious, I don't want to be critical of anybody who's overly cautious on this.
We are approaching the end of the program, and I gave Mr. Schilling a minute or so to have free time to express his opinions. I'll allow you the same time.
Sure. Well, I think more than anything, what is important to share with voters is, first of all, I hope if they haven't already voted, because early voting has been out there, that they will. And because I believe that a person's vote is their voice, and it's their way that they can choose among various priorities. And I see this election as a matter of priorities. I'm very proud of the fact that in 1 year and 10 months in office, that we've had some really very good success because I've been willing to work across the aisle. I happen to serve in the minority party, and the only reason you can, the only way you can be successful and bring home important legislation and important results to your home district is if you have a willingness to do that. So the fact that we opened a prison that the previous 12 years wasn't done, where we've got 1,100 jobs on their way to our congressional district with an annual economic impact of $200 million is vital. I serve on the Ag Committee. We passed a 5-year farm bill, very important to a region like this. I fought hard to make sure that ethanol is something that can continue to help build up our rural economy. And the manufacturing lab that I talked about earlier will lead to good paying jobs and really help shore up our economy in this region.
Congresswoman Cheri Bustos, thank you so much for joining us on At Issue.
Thank you, Age.
And as the Congresswoman mentioned, it's your turn. Make sure you go out and cast a ballot as you so choose, but we're glad to have brought you the issues on the 17th Congressional District race. We invite you to join us next week when we go back to our normal time, and you can join us for a discussion with the mayors of Bloomington and Normal. We'll see you then.